Hi students, so I'm going to explain to you the packet for practicing in-text citations. By now you should have watched my video lecture of the PowerPoint and also looking at the PowerPoint for how to properly cite in-text citations for MLA format. So you notice that I provided the directions here. The directions are, I'm using the exact same example that I used in the video lecture, and I apologize again for the quality of the video, recording it from my laptop screen. So you'll see that you're introducing the quote, and that involves two components. And then you are inserting the quote and you're summarizing the quote, and I gave you an example for each with the Tom Skilling weather example. All right, so you're going to fill in this packet. And in this packet, there are 4 different examples here that you're going to work with. So let me explain to you how these are done. So the first one, I'm asking you to suppose that you are writing an essay about the opportunities available to college students. How would you introduce the following quotes? You want to make sure that when you're introducing that quote, you're not repeating exactly what the author is saying. So you don't want the introduction of the quote. That means you're going to come up with a sentence before the quote that leads into the quote. Following that sentence, you have to come up with a brief signal phrase that is going to, and you can use I in your examples, so you can get creative here. So right after that sentence that you're using to lead into the quote, you're going to come up with something that introduces the author. In this case, the author's name is listed, if you notice, in the source. It's listed as Smith, DeAndre, because in a works cited page, it's always last name, first name. But when you talk about this author, you never want to use the author's first name alone. You want to use the first and last name. So you want to say, according to DeAndre Smith, or you want to say, DeAndre Smith writes, or DeAndre Smith states, or DeAndre Smith explains. And then you're going to give me a hypothetical page number. So say that he wrote it on page 89. You notice how in the parentheses after the source quote over here, you're going to put down, here's the source quote. So the source quote gives you information that you don't want to say the exact same thing that the author's saying. Otherwise, what do we have? Unintentional plagiarism. So here in parentheses after the quote, notice how there's no period here because the period's going to go after the parentheses. So it's going to have just Smith's last name. So it's just going to say Smith and say it's page 89. So it'd be Smith 89 parenthesis period, not PG and not comma, just Smith 89. So I'm just giving you an example of a page number. And then after you enter that information in parentheses, you're going to sum up the quote, because you always have to close out the conversation of a source quote before you go into the next conversation in any research essay. So what this packet is teaching you to do is to prepare for your own essays and how to do in-text citations properly in MLA format. All right, so you've introduced, inserted, and summarized the first quote. Going to the second quote. The second quote, suppose that you are writing an essay about college students and partying. How would you introduce the following quote? And again, you don't want to repeat what the author said. So you're going to, the author's name is Abner Yoakum. So when you're introducing, you need a lead-in sentence that's going to tie in your conversation to the quote. So after you write that lead-in sentence, you're going to write something down, a brief signal phrase that's going to say, Abner Yoakum states, or according to Abner Yoakum, coming out of the quote. So they give you pages 33 to 35 here. So I'm going to choose, I'll choose page 34. So here, his last name is Yoakum. So in parentheses after the quote, I'm going to have Yoakum, 34 parentheses period. Now I'm ready to summarize the quote. The next one, number 3, there are 4 of these again. So you're halfway done. So number 3, suppose that you are writing an essay about what to do when thinking about becoming a lawyer. How would you introduce the following quote? So they're talking about if you're interested in a law career, that English is actually a great subject. Well, that means that I missed my calling because I majored in English and I'm teaching English instead of becoming a lawyer. So I could say something like, well, I wish that I would have known when I went to college that I could have used that English degree to become a lawyer. And then I could say, according to, whenever you have more than one author, you're going to have last name, comma, first name for the first author. Then you're going to have first name, last name for the second author. So this is how I would quote them. According to Tara Collins and Kelly Almond, after the quote, they give you the page number right here. So I'm going to say Collins and Almond, 19, parenthesis, period. So that means that Collins and Almond, both of their names are used. They're not in alphabetical order because they are presented like this because Tara Collins is the main author and Kelly Almond assisted her. So that's why it's placed in that specific order. So I'm going to say Collins and Almond, 19, and that's in parentheses. And then I'm going to sum up the quote. The last one is a personal interview. So what I'm going to do for this one, suppose that you are writing an essay about what to do when thinking about becoming a lawyer. How would you introduce the following quote? And after the quote, what would you write about to summarize the author's thoughts in relation to your argument? You're going to, this one has, as I said, no page numbers. So how would we do this one? So I'm going to introduce the quote where what this author is suggesting. So maybe I can use, I'm going to say in a personal interview, but first before I do that, I need a lead-in sentence to that. So he's talking about getting a job, and you might want to talk about, so it looks like he's not talking about necessarily being a lawyer, so I don't know why that's in there necessarily. But in any case, it's talking about getting a job when you're going to college. So when you're getting a job when you're going to college, that it's giving you good work experience is what it's saying. How would you introduce that in a sentence that leads into that quote? Think about that. And then you're going to write down, in a personal interview by Tom Workman, or Tom Workman states in a personal interview, comma, and then coming out of the quote, it's just going to have in parentheses, Workman, and that's it, just Workman, because there's no page number. It's a personal interview, Workman. And then coming out of the quote, you summarize in your own words. You don't want the introduce or the summarize to say the exact same thing. So figure out and get creative how to mix that up. And if you have any questions along the way, I'm going to check these packets and have you do corrections as necessary.